When it came time to plant tomatoes, he'd say, now you dig a big bushel basket size hole, and then put in some little granite sand for phosphate and a little bit of lime to give it calcium, and some cow manure and compost, and mix it all together, and you'd really have some good tomatoes with that.
John and my husband's uncle both grew up where it was a much longer growing season than here. And they had an ongoing contest to see who could grow figs, or produce figs. It was hilarious to see those fig trees because they babied them and nurtured them all summer. And then just about the time there was going to be frost, you would go by both houses and there would be bales of hay, igloos made of everything surrounding those fig trees, strings of lights to keep them warm at night. I'm not sure either one of them ever got a bowl of figs, but it surely was fun to watch that competition.
And one of the things I really thought was funny that he did, he was so, emphatic about the tomato plants not getting too cold that he would get water from the overflow valve off of his hot water tank and mix it with cold water to have warm water to put on his tomato plants. That's how particular he was about growing plants, and he really wanted everyone to grow food. He had great stories about people growing food on houses in Korea, where he lived for a good part of his life. And anyway, a good man. I still miss him.
It would be January and it would still be dark outside, and I would pick up the phone and I would say, "Good morning." And every single time, season after season, Dr. Wilson would say, "It is a good morning." And then he would launch into always the next phrase out of his mouth was, "So I've been thinking." And he would have been up since like 4 a.m. in January scheming on how we were going to grow tomatoes that year, because Dr. Wilson was a very competitive gardener, and for him, he wanted to have tomatoes by the 4th of July, and he wanted to have tomatoes make it through the Western North Carolina blight. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of research. There was research being done, but there weren't a lot of blight-resistant tomatoes. So every year, he was coming up with new, amazing ideas about how to grow tomatoes.
For many summers, the whole community enjoyed going over to the lake at dusk, where the evening primrose display happened. It was a must activity for anybody who had an out-of-town guest. I'm not sure where John got those seeds, but he was always looking for ways to involve people in growing something. So he planted this garden of yellow evening primroses down near the path at the lake. It was complete with a bench, so that if you wanted to sit a while and watch the primroses open, you could, or you could just notice as you were walking around the lake. But his sister Liz used to sit on that little bench, and she would ring a little bell when the first one opened, and then when the next one opened, and then all of a sudden there was just this cacophony of bells going off as the primroses opened. John loved to get out there and tell people about primroses and all about them. And if anybody wanted seeds so they could start their own primrose garden, he would take names. And in the fall, when they went to seed, he would collect the seeds and mail people all over the country those primrose seeds. So I suspect if there aren't still some of John's primroses blooming probably all over the country.
One of the most memorable things about Dr. Wilson, about one of his physical traits, was that he had very prominent and long eyebrows, and that we used to joke with him that he wouldn't need sunglasses or a hat to garden because his eyebrows were so prominent that they shaded his eyes while he was down here at the garden. And he always enjoyed just those kind of little joking with each other, and just such a fun-loving person. But he was always very animated and entertaining. So he was able to to take those kind of jokes and not be personally, not as a personal affront.
So I do have one funny story about Dr. Wilson. Of course, I hung on every word he uttered, but we were talking about pests in the garden, and they were having a problem with, I guess, some groundhogs and some raccoons, and of course, being the kind place that this is, they were live trapping these animals. And he kind of stops and he looks at me with this really mischievous look in his eye. And he says, "You know what we do with the raccoons?" And I'm like, "Oh gosh, what are they doing? Are they eating them or skinning them?" I'm like, "No, Dr. Wilson, what are you doing with the raccoons that you catch?" "We take them over to the Biltmore estate and turn them loose in their cornfields." He had a bit of fun in him.
John often called us, he was a beekeeper, and he had bees, and I'm sure he did that for the bees too, just so we had pollinators. But he would call us when he was getting ready to extract a comb from one of the hives. And I can just still see that big grin on his face as he watched us bite into that comb with honey dripping all over our chin. No matter though what the season was, when you left John's house, you left with apples or blackberries or blueberries. You always left the house with something he had grown.
I first met Dr. Wilson in 2005 when I moved to a house about a 5-minute walk and went for a walk one day and discovered that people were gardening down here in the community garden. And Dr. Wilson had started the garden in 2004. And so I came along and met him around August of 2005 and started volunteering with him every week and gardened with him all through that winter and the next summer, and for about 4 or 5 years every week after that. And I remember the first time I met his wife was about maybe, I don't know, 3 or so months after we'd been working together. And she, and just to caveat here, Dr. Wilson was in his, I think, mid to late 80s when I met him. And so Nancy is lacing up her shoes. I'm at their house for a visit, and she is lacing up her shoes to go play tennis. And she looks up to me, looks over at me from lacing up her shoes, and she says, "Well, I see you're trying to keep up." And I was in my 30s at the time and had 3 small young children. So yeah.